From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Wednesday, August 27, 2025. The CEO of commercial property giant JLL is abruptly leaving the company after revelations in The Australian about a culture of harassment. Yoni Bashan, editor of our business column Margin Call, has the scoop. And you can hear Yoni talking about JLL by scrolling back in your feed for our full episode. Yoni's story is live right now at theaustralian.com.au. For the first time since World War II, Australia is expelling an ambassador. Iran's representative is on his way back to Tehran. That's as Australia says the Islamic Revolutionary Guard orchestrated the firebombing of a Bondi deli and a Melbourne synagogue. Today, our foreign editor Greg Sheridan on how Australia likely cooperated with Israel's spy agency Mossad on this investigation, and why Iran's all-powerful ruling elite would target Jews on the other side of the world.
Palestinian militants from the armed group Hamas launched a surprise coordinated attack on Israel by land, sea, and air.
Flares were thrown, anti-Semitic slurs chanted, and an Israeli flag set on fire during that illegal pro-Palestinian rally last night at the Opera House.
4 o'clock this morning when Lewis's Continental Kitchen caught fire. This is on Curl Lewis Street here in Bondi.
Melbourne's Jewish community is in shock after a firebomb attack on one of Australia's busiest synagogues.
Worshippers ran for their lives as the sanctuary, built by Holocaust survivors 60 years ago, was destroyed.
It's been a dramatic 2 years, and now the government says the 2024 firebombings of a Sydney Jewish deli and a Melbourne synagogue were the work of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's all-powerful military rulers. Now the Australian government will outlaw the IRGC as a terrorist organisation.
They have sought to harm and terrify Jewish Australians and to sow hatred and division in our community. The actions of my government send a clear message, a message to all Australians that we stand against anti-Semitism and we stand against violence.
Spy boss Mike Burgess.
Iran's actions are utterly unacceptable. They put lives at risk, they terrified the community, and they tore at our social fabric. Iran and its proxies literally and figuratively lit the matches and fanned the flames.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong.
We have suspended the operations of our embassy in Iran for the safety of our officials and Australia's border security. Australia's officials are, as the Prime Minister said, now in a third country.
So how did they allegedly do it? Well, police have charged 2 Victorian men with arson, car theft and conduct endangering life over the Adass Israel synagogue attack. Police believe another conspirator is still at large. In relation to the Sydney deli attack, New South Wales police have charged 2 men with firebombing and another with directing the attack. That's Syed Musawi, a former senior bikie with the Nomads, who police say used the codename James Bond and told the others he was to be paid $12,000 for organising the attack. He's pleaded not guilty.
There is a layer cake of cutouts between IRGC and the person or the alleged perpetrators conducting crimes. In between them, they tap into a number of people, agents of IRGC and people that they know in the criminal world, and work through there. There is an organised crime element offshore in this, but that's not to suggest organised crime are doing it. They're just using cutouts, including people who are criminal and members of organised crime gangs, to do their bidding or direct their bidding.
ASIO believes the Revolutionary Guard may have orchestrated more attacks. Greg Sheridan is The Australian's foreign editor. Greg, how significant is it for Australia to expel an ambassador?
It's hugely significant, Claire. This marks a significant point in our diplomatic history. Not since World War II have we expelled an ambassador, a very serious move to take, and I'm full of praise for the Albanese government. I think they should have booted this ambassador out earlier for the things he himself was saying about Jews and Israel. But this shocking Iranian perpetration of terrorism on our soils deserves a reaction as strong as this.
The government's being very careful to say that they believe it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and not the Iranian government's representatives in Australia, the diplomats working at the embassy, who are responsible for this. But, Greg, practically, what's the difference?
Well, in a sense, there's no difference because Iran is a little bit like the People's Republic of China. Everybody works for the central government. But the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the most powerful institution within Iran, and it runs Iran's international terrorism. Now, a lot of terror analysts have held for some time that Iran is now the biggest state sponsor of international terrorism. It harasses and sometimes murders Iranian dissidents or members of its diaspora community who are opposed to the Iranian regime. Well, that's a shocking thing. That is state-sanctioned murder. That is state-sanctioned terrorism. Knowledge is often very compartmentalised. So similarly with the Russians, it wouldn't be the case that the Russian ambassador would know necessarily about every operation that was being carried out by Russian intelligence on foreign soil. Similarly with the Chinese, the ambassador would have a good general sense of what the nation is doing, but these clandestine operations are very much on a need-to-know basis. Similarly in our system, not that we are remotely morally or functionally or equivalent in any way to the Iranians, but if ISIS was conducting an operation in some other country, it wouldn't necessarily be the case that our ambassador knew all the operational details. It's not surprising that the ambassador himself may not have had knowledge. And if Mike Burgess, that's the director of ASIO, tells us it wasn't the embassy involved, well, that's okay. I've got no reason to doubt Burgess's word there.
Now, from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' perspective, they've got a lot of fish to fry. They've got a lot of enemies around the world, mainly in the Middle East. How significant an operation is this? Why would they be bothering blowing up a deli in Bondi and a synagogue in Melbourne?
So they are a very big organisation. They've got a kind of a worldwide mission. We're accustomed to Iran harassing and in extreme cases assassinating dissidents in the diaspora community. Iran also has a record of anti-Jewish terrorism. There have been cases where Jewish sites, there was a famous one in Buenos Aires, have been blown up, and ultimately the fingerprints go back to the Iranian government. The thing that is very difficult for Australians to understand is that there's a very deep tradition of Islamic anti-Semitism. As I'm ashamed to say, there is quite a strong tradition of Christian anti-Semitism. And the Iranian regime is very ideological. It is an extreme Islamist regime. Most Muslims don't follow these ideas, but the Iranian regime has a Shia version, really, of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And Jews and the West and Israel are among the villains in that cosmology. So there is a hatred of Jews, which motivates this, but also, according to Mike Burgess, there's also a desire to disrupt social cohesion in Australia. Australia is seen as part of the West, as an ally of the United States, which is the great Satan. You know, even today in Iran, there are chants of death to America, and America is the great Satan, and Israel is the little Satan, and so on. And we're the great Satan's helper. So they're quite happy to try to cause social division in Australia, and the tragic events in Gaza and the conflict there makes this a propitious time for them to stir up anti-Semitic sentiment. They are much more concerned with nations of the Middle East and then with cities like London and Paris, very, very concerned with the United States. But the fact that they would go to the trouble of doing this in Australia shows their sort of global reach and their global ambition.
Not mentioned during the press conference on Tuesday was Israel. But Mike Burgess did say that ASIO had cooperated with its partners overseas. Presumably the one that knows the most about the Revolutionary Guards is Mossad.
Well, that's absolutely right, Claire. So part of the tragedy of everything that's happening at the moment is the decline of the Australia-Israel relationship. Australia and Israel go back a long way. It was Australian troops who liberated Beersheba from the Ottoman Turks, and that really led the way to the expansion of the Zionist movement in Israel. The word Koba comes from the Hebrew word keva, which Australian diggers picked up while they were in the Middle East. This is a very long-standing relationship, a very intimate relationship. Now, there is no country on earth which knows more about every aspect of Iran than Israel. The smartest Israelis there are spend their lives studying Iran. We have a very deep and intimate intelligence exchange with Israel, which I hope and trust has not been disturbed by the recent coldness between the two governments. Now, we also pass information to Israel. It's not a one-way street. However, it is the case that they know more about threats to us than we know about threats to them. Australians are alive today because Israel has given the Australian government information on terrorist networks in our region. And I don't know who Burgess was referring to when he talked about cooperation with the sympathetic foreign agencies, but you would have to think, as you say, Claire, the agency in the whole world which knows most about Iran is the Israeli government and Mossad and Shin Bet and the other analytical agencies within Israel.
Coming up, so how should Jewish Australians interpret all this? The Jewish community's been on a hell of an emotional rollercoaster since October 2023, haven't they, Greg? You know, first on October 9, we saw the protests outside the Opera House with chants that they found deeply disturbing. Then a series of attacks, including these two, the Lewis's Continental Kitchen and the Adass Israel Synagogue in Melbourne. But then the federal police came out and indicated that, well, there's really nothing to see here. This is a criminal con job. It's a hoax being pulled by a crook who wants to negotiate a change in his criminal status. That left a lot of Jewish people feeling as though their concerns about those attacks were being minimised. How should Jewish Australians, do you think, Greg, interpret what authorities are saying now, which is that at least some of these attacks, maybe more, were coming from Iran, and as you say, with an undoubtedly anti-Semitic intention?
Yes, Claire, I think Jewish people in Australia would be reassured by the federal government's actions. Even when the federal police were telling us that some of these attacks were directed by a foreign-based Australian criminal seeking to negotiate a better outcome on his sentence, it seemed just wildly implausible on its face that that was the deep explanation. That might have been the surface of things, but if he was overseas, why was he trying to negotiate a better outcome on a sentence in Australia? I mean, you just don't come home to Australia if you're going to go to jail. And how did he think that that series of actions was going to help him? But also, even if all that was true, it was almost certain that he was acting also from anti-Semitic motives. I mean, the fact that the anti-Semitism comes from a criminal doesn't mean that it's not anti-Semitism. And Australian authorities, at one level, understandably, but I think mistakenly, are always inclined to downplay this because they're trying to reassure communities. They don't want to exaggerate a problem and they want people to stay calm. But you've always got to deal with reality. Now, I have been very critical of the Albanese government for not understanding, even before October 7, that there was a burgeoning crisis of anti-Semitism around the world. There is a right-wing anti-Semitism. You see it in some of these insane quasi-neo-Nazi movements in the United States. And there is a left-wing anti-Semitism which regards Israel as simply the source of all evil. Now, sadly, all those toxic, terrible streams of hatred of Jews, the oldest and most terrible hatred we know in our civilization, come together into a giant river of anti-Semitism. Now, at no point at all, ever, has the federal government looked like it understood that. The New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, seems to have got the idea pretty quickly. But now I would say the federal government responded with proportionate, serious, real intent to one element of this crisis. So Iran is not just a difficult nation which causes trouble. It is a nation motivated by an ideology which is anti-Semitic in its core. And therefore, a government like Australia, which wants to safeguard its Jewish community and safeguard Australian cohesion and all the rest of it, has to confront the government of Iran. There's some value in having an Australian embassy in Iran, but not if you give away your basic internal decency. And we were seeming to do that in allowing the ambassador endless scope to just say and do the most vile things. We should have said, well, you can hold those views if you like, but you can't live in Australia and hold them. So, a bit late, but they've got there, and they're also right to expose this all publicly, to tell us all about it, and therefore that makes Iran pay a certain reputational price. The people around the world will see what Iran has been doing in Australia. So, I think on the whole they haven't been a very good government dealing with anti-Semitism, but this is a very good day.
Greg Sheridan is The Australian's foreign editor. The Australian's been doing groundbreaking reporting about the Iranian diaspora and how they've been targeted too. You can read all about that and all our analysis right now at theaustralian.com.au.